For the second time in the Oregon Ducks' first season in the Big Ten, the 2024 season, Oregon football is playing on a Friday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time. This game will take place, of course, at 7 p.m. local time in the Central Time Zone as the second-ranked 6-0, 3-0 in Big Ten Conference play Oregon Ducks travel to Purdue, who is 1-5 in a lowly, undesirable 0-3 in Big Ten Conference play. I will tell you right now that Oregon should win, that Oregon should cover the 27.5-point spread that is in their favor. ESPN's FPI gives Oregon a 95.1% chance to win this game, despite the fact that they have a short week. They're coming off of a massive win against Ohio State, so this is prime time for a letdown spot. And Oregon is not playing in Autzen Stadium. They're playing in Ross-Ade Stadium, where Purdue has had a knack for beating top 10 teams when hosting them, beating Michigan State in 2021, beating Ohio State in 2018. They beat Iowa, number 2 on the road in 2021. And the last time they played a top 2 team, number 2 Michigan, it was on the road, and, well, they got splattered. And 2021 and 2018 are a long, long time ago. But it's a part of college football history, tradition, humor, and culture that Purdue is just a team that can come out of nowhere and ruin your team's season. So that's why I am previewing this game and giving a prediction on it, because there is some buzz around this matchup. But as I said, Oregon should win. Purdue is absolute cannon fodder, and I don't think any Purdue fan would argue that. But they could have a chance in this game, and Oregon is, I think, after the win they had last weekend, they're kind of destined to potentially have a letdown spot, or at least to come out maybe slow on the first drive. After all, it is a Friday night game in a different time zone. The time zone change applies both ways for the West Coast and East Coast Big Ten teams, and they get a short week of preparation. Purdue does as well, but Purdue's the home team here. They're playing in their own time zone, so they'll have the more familiar feeling. And, well, the storyline's really surrounding Purdue here in terms of the matchup, because Oregon's storyline and their spotlight moment came against Ohio State and the awesome win that they had. Before we dive into this game, though, and I give you a preview and prediction, I want you, if you can, to please like the video, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, comment your thoughts down below on this matchup with your prediction, share this video around to other college football fans, and please join our Discord server. Really, especially Purdue and Oregon fans watching this. We did not have a lot of Oregon fans in the Discord server after they beat Ohio State, and then some came in after they joined via my reaction video. The more Oregon fans we can get, the better. You have a fantastic fan base, a fantastic environment in Autzen Stadium. Your coach is a gamer who's going to win a national championship or maybe more, but regardless, your school's first. And you're a big brand, and we need you in there. So please, if you're an Oregon fan, join it. If you're a Purdue fan, well, College Football with Sam is the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube. We cover all 18 Big Ten teams, some more than others, yes, but we cover all 18, and we cover based off of how good you are, in large part. So Oregon's bad, or not Oregon. Oregon's really good, but my apologies. Purdue is bad, objectively. However, we're covering them right now. I covered them against Notre Dame, where I very incorrectly predicted them to win, and it would mean a lot of you guys could join the Discord server as well. We talk college football 24/7 in there. Joining the Discord server, liking the video, sharing, subscribing, hitting the bell, and commenting, all those things help out the channel. We will be doing a giveaway at 20,000 subscribers that I'm sure you will want to partake in. And join the Patreon page or purchase merchandise from my merchandise store via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment if you want to monetarily go the extra mile and sponsor this channel. Thank you. And let's get into the broad comparisons here, which obviously go in Oregon's favor. Like I said, Oregon should win this game. They're viewed as 19.2 points better than the average college football team in ESPN's FPI, where they are, I believe, 8th, maybe 7th or 9th. They're in that range. They're not top 6 in FPI, which is mainly due to the fact that they struggled mightily against Idaho and also against Boise State, and that pushed them down in Football Power Index from 3rd to around the 10th area, and they haven't gotten enough blown out wins to impress FPI. How do you impress FPI? You blow out opponents. That's how you impress FPI. S&P Plus, I think, is a little bit more balanced because with the new clock rules, it's harder for teams of any tempo, unless you really like to go up tempo, to blow out a lot of teams. So I like S&P Plus. They're tempo adjusted. Bill Connolly does a fantastic job. And in that model, Oregon is viewed as 23.7 points better than the average college football team. Purdue, they are viewed as 9.7. You heard that right. 9.7 points worse than the average college football team. Purdue's a bad team, and they're 4.4 points worse than the average college football team in SP+. You adjust for home field advantage, which, given that it's a Friday night and Purdue fans seem to be a pretty loyal bunch, pretty dedicated bunch, though I don't know that for sure. You factor in home field advantage is probably +3, maybe a little more because the time zone change. Ultimately, Oregon is still viewed as around 24 points, honestly, better than the average college football team per power ratings. And yet, they're favored by a little bit more than that. And I think a lot of that's because of the team that Oregon is, the fact that they're undefeated, they're one of the best teams in the country, they're explosive, and Purdue has surrendered large, and I mean large chunks of points to opponents of all calibers, to Notre Dame, who's top 10 in FPI, and to Wisconsin, who's not even top 25 in FPI, though they are top 30. But they've gotten blown out in multiple games, the Boilermakers have. And you see that in the points per play margin. Purdue is more toward the terrible side in points per play margin than Oregon is to the elite side. Rather shocking, that is. I didn't think Purdue would be this bad from the preseason, by the way. I thought they would be a team that would struggle to make a bowl game because of their tough schedule, but I thought they would improve. If anything, they may be a worse team than they are last year. At least they were when Hudson Card was quarterback. What they did against Illinois was impressive with Ryan Brown at quarterback, but we'll get to him in a few minutes. Oregon, on a points per play margin basis, scores 0.232 more points per play than their average opponent does per play. Purdue scores 0.306 fewer points per play than their average opponent does per play. Purdue, on an average basis, basically gets blown out by their opponents. Oregon, on an average basis, game controls their opponents. Not necessarily blowing them out, but game control is like kind of a step below just purely dominating all of your opponents. And Oregon's played Ohio State, who is viewed by S&P Plus and FPI as the second best team in all of college football. I think they're a top 4 team. There's no shame in only beating Ohio State by 1. It was a very impressive performance, especially from a coaching angle. You look at their strength of schedules, they're both top 50. Oregon's is 35th, Purdue is 37th. Oregon is 10th in game control, though, and despite only having a strength of schedule that is 2 spots lower than the Ducks, the Boilermakers are outside of the top 100 in game control, which means that the vast majority of college football teams, even like 30, 40 group of 5 teams, would be more competitive and do a better job with Purdue's schedule than the Boilermakers are. Conversely, for Oregon, they're 10th. Only 9 teams would be projected or simulated to do a better job with their schedule than the Ducks. And I think a lot of that actually ties into their performance against Idaho and Boise. If those were more dominant performances, and I think Oregon would beat Idaho and Boise State by more touchdowns, by Boise State probably a few touchdowns, but not a blowout. They'd blow out Idaho now. If they did that, they'd probably be top 5 in game control and top 5 in FBI. But that's theoretical what ifs or what ifs, and if Oregon continues to win games throughout the season, they'll rise in those power ratings and I think be accurately rated. But we'll have to see. And as for Purdue, this is a big moment to, I guess, launch off of what was kind of a moral victory over Illinois. Illinois was a top 25 team. Purdue nearly came back and beat them in overtime on the road. It's a rivalry game, yes, but they were very competitive. Now they have this massive opportunity against the number 2 team in the country who's leading the pack in the Big Ten, along with Penn State and Indiana. Who would have thought that? They're all tied for first place. The critical matchup here is Purdue's rushing attack, which I'm assuming Ryan Brown is going to be starting in this game because of how good he looked against Illinois, but I could be wrong. They should start him. Way more dynamic than Hudson Card, has a higher ceiling. Him in the rushing game, along with Devin Mockabee, along with Reggie Love III, and the offensive line that they have, which has not been great, but they do have some players that have played well at times, historically or even this year individually. Them facing off against Oregon's defense, that's the critical matchup. If Purdue has any chance at pulling off this upset, it will be because they are able to run on Oregon and then open up the pass via the run. Defensively, I'm not going to tell you there's a path for Purdue to limit Oregon's offense. The way this is going to happen is Oregon starts off slow in general. Purdue takes a lead. It turns into a shootout, and Purdue probably wins by converting a 2-point conversion. Sort of a similar game to what they had against Illinois, except they actually get the 2-point conversion, or maybe Oregon misses a field goal, misses the game-tying field goal. But you look at this game and you look at Purdue's rushing offense, and they have had some very successful performances at times. Their rushing offense popped off against Illinois. It did very well in the first game of the season against an FCS opponent. They've played Ohio State. They have played Notre Dame. Those are some of the better defenses in the country. They're averaging 4.8 yards per carry, which is 43rd, 138 rushing yards per game, which is 77th, and only 28.6 rush attempts per game. So they're modestly efficient with the amount of rushing plays they call, but they are absolutely awful in the passing game. Their best game of the season by a country mile was against Illinois, and that was a loss. You compare that to an Oregon defense that, look, they're allowing opponents to rush for 3.9 yards per carry, which is 49th, but they played Boise State and Ashton Jeanty, and Ashton Jeanty's running on everyone, so I think that kind of is an outlier there. And outside of 2 20-plus yard runs by Travion Henderson, they held Ohio State to under 3 yards per carry on the ground. This is a very good rush defense that has a negative bias toward it because they played Ashton Jeanty, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, and, I mean, those are 3 of the top 10 running backs in America, or at least 3 of the top 2, depending on what Quinshon does for the rest of the season. But Oregon is holding opponents also to 119.8 rushing yards per game, which is 36th. Opponents don't run all that much on Oregon. I imagine Purdue may try to, but I don't necessarily know. And Oregon on the season is only allowing opponents to have 313.4 total yards per game, which is 19th, only allowing teams to score 20.4 points per game, which is 26th, and opponents only average 0.318 points per play on Oregon, which is 35th. It's not a top 10 defense. It's not. It's, I think, a similar caliber of defense to last year's, is kind of what I'm thinking. And last year's defense was top 10 in a variety of categories, but they played an easier schedule than what they have this season. I mean, their toughest opponent was Washington, who they played twice and lost to. Now, Oregon has not faced exactly the toughest strength of schedule either this year, but they'll have to face someone tough. It'll actually be a similar strength of schedule to last year's, except I think that they're playing better rushing offenses. I mean, no team on their schedule last year was known for their rushing offense. Boise State is. Ohio State was before this game. Now that's a little bit questionable. And really, I'm reaching here intentionally to, well, make this interesting. Because, again, Oregon should win and win big, but if there is a path for Purdue, it is through their rushing offense. And let me talk about Ryan Brown before I get into these offenses and really talk mostly about Oregon and a little bit about Purdue too, but mostly about Oregon, because if Purdue wins this, no one will see it coming unless they're shifting their chips in the middle of the table. I mean, there isn't an objective reason to pick Purdue here. But you have Oregon, who is the second best team in the country, and the quarterback they have faced who has the best mobility was Will Howard, who was able to maneuver the pocket with them, have some good runs. Ryan Brown had 118 rushing yards against Illinois, averaged over 6 yards per carry in that game. He had 365 passing yards against Illinois in 37 attempts, 3 touchdowns, no picks, a 177.2 passer rating, completed 67.6% of his throws. He had an 81.1 QBR, by the way. So it's not like he had a game with a ton of big plays and then made some mistakes. He played a extremely impressive game. He did. And against an Illinois team that has had a knack for forcing turnovers through the air and having a respectable pass defense, that was rather impressive, his performance was. So pay attention to him in this game. If Ryan Walters has competency and confidence left, I think Ryan Brown will be starting in this game. You look offensively, I would take Oregon everywhere except for maybe tight end. I think tight end is a pretty solid push there because Max Clare has 352 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. Drew Bieber, their backup tight end, has 73 receiving yards. Over 400 receiving yards in their tight end group. Clare's a really good tight end, averaging 16.8 yards per reception. You look at the Oregon Ducks here, and Oregon's leading receiver is Tez Johnson, then Evan Stewart, then Terrence Ferguson. Terrence Ferguson has 321 receiving yards, averaging 16 yards per reception. Kenyon Sadiq has 112 receiving yards, no receiving touchdowns. Both of these tight end rooms are pretty good, but everywhere else, Oregon is clearly in front. I mean, Dylan Gabriel on 201 attempts has 1,790 yards, averaging 8.9 yards per pass attempt. He's completing over 75% of his passes, 13 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, a 169.3 passer rating. You look at their rushing game, they're averaging 4.7 yards per carry with 11 rushing touchdowns, with 977 total yards. Jordan James is 667 total yards on the ground with 6 rushing touchdowns and averaging 6 yards per carry. And in the receiving game, he has 67 receiving yards on 10 receptions. Jordan James is one of the better running backs, not just in the Big Ten, but in all of the country, and you see it with the way he runs. Oregon has also done a much better job at protecting Dylan Gabriel and opening up lanes on the ground. They've only allowed 7 sacks throughout the season, and I don't think that Dylan Gabriel has given up a sack since their game maybe against Oregon State or UCLA. No, since their game against Boise State, he hasn't been sacked at all. Their offensive line got healthy. I think that Lanning intentionally rested some players maybe longer than he had to get the team healthy for Ohio State. They clearly hid things for the Ohio State game. It's a sign of good coaching, and also the fact that they were confident that some of their second or third string players could step up in big ways. And Bryce Betcher is an example of that. Bryce Betcher was a player who was not projected to start or have a big role, from my understanding, in the defense, and we'll get to the defense in a few minutes, but he leads the team in total tackles and has a pick and 3 passes defended. I mean, this is a very deep team in all parts. And then you look at Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, Trayshawn Holden, who was suspended for much of that Ohio State-Oregon game. They all have at least 300 receiving yards, and at minimum for each of them 3 receiving touchdowns. Tez Johnson has 6. Purdue, on the other hand, their leading rusher is Devin Mockabee with 464, 2 touchdowns. Reggie Love also has 2 touchdowns. They're both averaging over 5 yards per carry, but they've had big games against FCS opponents and also against Illinois. And outside of that, they have not had many big games. Like Mockabee against Oregon State, he had over 100 rushing yards. He had 89 rushing yards against Indiana State and over 100 against Illinois. But against Wisconsin and Nebraska, he combined for 86. You add that in to the game against Notre Dame, and he only had a 106 combined yards in those 3 games. I don't think it's his fault. I think it's the offensive line, the offensive scheme. The running backs for Purdue are underrated, but really your offensive line makes the rushing offense, not your running backs. And Jamal Edrine, Jerron Tibbs, and Cam Brown are the leading receivers for Purdue. Oregon's biggest strength right now as the season progresses, I think it's going to be their offensive line, because Charlie Picard got some snaps, same with other players, and I think that experience plus the fact they're starting 5 and Josh Connerly Jr., Johnny Cornelius, Marcus Harper II, Nishad Strother, and Iapani Lololu are all healthy, they have depth now. And when healthy and performing at a high level, they're one of the best offensive lines in the country. And you saw that against Ohio State. It's very clear how good and physical they are. For Purdue, Gus Hartwig's had some good years in the past, same with Marcus Mbo. But outside of those two, there aren't many players on that line that I'm impressed by. Oregon is just, frankly, they're better at almost every position, and tight end is just a push because Purdue's actually good at that position. Oregon has an elite offense, especially when it's functioning at its ceiling. Defensively, I think it's pretty obvious that Oregon is better everywhere on the defensive side of the ball. Oregon this season has had 17 sacks, 27 passes defended, 4 interceptions, 4 forced fumbles, and 2 fumble recoveries. Purdue, on the other hand, 14 sacks, and I think over a third of those came against Illinois because Illinois does not have a good pass block unit. 17 passes defended, 2 interceptions, and only 2 forced fumbles. Oregon is clearly the better defense, and you just have to look at the total numbers here. Ryan Walters is a defensive-minded coach, and yet his side of the ball is really struggling the most. Purdue is outside the top 100 in all statistical categories in rushing offense. Opponents running them about 42.6 times per game because they can't stop the run. Opponents average over 250 yards on the ground against Purdue. Opponents average 6 yards per carry against Purdue and almost 13 rushing first downs per game against Purdue. For Oregon, meanwhile, as I already told you, they're inside the top 50 in most rushing defense statistics. In total defense, they're inside the top 25. Purdue, on average, allows opponents to gain over 500 yards per game. Not a good defense. And Purdue is 131st in opponent points per game. They allow 46.8. It's just yikes. And it doesn't get better in the passing game either, where Oregon is 20th in opponent yards per pass attempt, only allowing 6.2. And they're inside the top 15, 12th when it comes to opponent yards per completion, 10.1. They did a very good job against Ohio State, not allowing any explosive plays. Ohio State's biggest play on the day was ironically a Travion Henderson yard run. And not ironic when it comes to Henderson, but ironic in the fact that they could not run the ball for most of their carries, and it just happened because Henderson's that good and Simmons was healthy for the play, that Ohio State's biggest play was a run on a night where they really struggled to run the football, especially as the game progressed. They did not have a single explosive passing play outside of maybe the opening pass to Will Kazmarek that should have been ruled an interception. But calls won't always go your way. Oregon won, and that shows toughness and good coaching to overcome a mistake like that. Purdue, though, getting back on topic, Oregon only allows 10.1 yards per completion. Purdue almost allows that many yards per pass attempt. They allow 9.6 yards per pass attempt and 15.3 yards per completion. I mean, Braden Locke looked like Tom Brady against their defense. It's clearly something wrong with that unit. They don't have the personnel to run the type of defense they want to. Too slow, not athletic enough, not deep enough, and as a result, they do get killed on the defensive side of the ball. Oregon's clearly better on the D-line, at linebacker, and at defensive back. If you're going to watch out for anyone for Purdue, I would say it's going to be Kydron Jenkins, who leads the team in sacks with 5. Will Helt, a defensive end, is second with 4. And Kydron Jenkins also has 48 total tackles. And Dylan Thieneman has 2 passes defended, a sack, and 50 total tackles. Those would be the 3 players I'd pay attention to. Meanwhile, for Oregon, Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell showed why Oregon pursued them in the portal. Harmon in particular with how good he played, and Jordan Birch and Mateo Uiagalelei are just they're good. And Birch should be healthy for this game. I believe so. He wasn't healthy against Ohio State. And also pay attention to Bryce Betcher at linebacker, Jeffrey Bassa, Devin Jackson, and in the secondary, look at Nico Reed, Tyshim Johnson, Kobe Savage, Jabbar Muhammad, and Brandon Johnson. And also Tiatum Tuioti in the jack position. Oregon is deep everywhere on defense. I do think this defense is still at the level of last year, but it could be better. I was impressed with how many times they were able to stop Ohio State in the short run. Occasionally they gave them up, but Ohio State has the best running back room in the country, and their offensive line's better than it was last year. So I was impressed specifically with Oregon on the defensive line, which is where I think they're better compared to last year. I don't know if they're better in pass defense. I don't exactly know. If you think you know, tell me in the comments section below. Just watching Oregon this year compared to last season, it looks like they're better up front on defense. I don't know about passing defense. I'd say probably about the same. And then they're worse overall on offense. So it all kind of balances out. This is still a very good team, not to be trifled with. I do actually think that Oregon was better last year than they are this year, but I can't name you a single team outside of Texas and maybe Penn State. And I'm trying to think. Like, I'm talking about teams who were national title contenders last year. Like, obviously Indiana's better, Nebraska's better, Iowa is better. But I struggle to name teams who were top 15, top 10 last year who are better this year. Very few of them. College football is compressing as a sport, at least at the power level. The group of fives floor is always getting lower. The Power Four ceiling is about the same collectively. For the top-end teams, it may be a little bit lower, but with enough money and coaching, I think it could be the same. The floor for your average power team, I think, is rising, though. Like, and by average, I mean for your traditional 6 and 6s, 7 and 5s, 8 and 4s, because those are power teams, so you can get a good profile as a player, but you're not going to be crowded out exactly like you would be if you transferred to an Ohio State or Alabama or Georgia. I hope that makes sense. But all I was trying to say there is, despite the fact that I think last year's Oregon team was better than this year's Oregon team, it doesn't really matter. And relative to where Oregon is placed in the college football hierarchy, despite the fact that I think they were a better team last year than this year, they are higher up the food chain this season than they were last season. I think last season was a much stronger year of college football than this season. That's just my own personal opinion. I'd say it's partially subjective, but also looking at the difference of teams that early last season were thought of as national title contenders, like Washington, Oregon, not really early, but middle this time last season. Washington, Oregon out of the Pac-12. You had Ohio State. You had Michigan. You had Georgia. You had Texas, who went into Alabama and just smoked them. Alabama reemerged later in the year. Florida State, when healthy, sometimes put on an efficiency monster performance. Where are those teams this year? Only one I could think of is Texas and Ohio State, but Ohio State's already suffered a loss where their defense did not exactly look good, thanks to Oregon's awesome offense. Oregon's better in the trenches than Purdue, and they're better on special teams than Purdue, and I don't really have to go further than that. I think that's pretty obvious. And you look at coaching, it's the same thing. Oregon is the better head coach, offensive staff, defensive staff, and better strength and conditioning. And this leads me to pick Oregon here to win and win big. I do think because you're traveling time zones, Purdue may come out hot and motivated, especially from last week's game where they nearly beat Illinois, and Oregon may come out slow. So it may be closer competitive for a half, but I'm taking Oregon to cover here and hang a 50 burger on Purdue because Lanning will want to prove a point. His team will want to prove a point. And if Notre Dame can put up a 60 burger on Purdue, then almost any offense in America, if they play their A-plus game, can. A little bit of sarcasm there, but Notre Dame's offense, when they played Purdue, did not exactly profile as even a good offense. Oregon as an elite offense. I think they'll put up a 50 burger. They could put up even more points. Maybe Lanning just really wants to prove a point. But after a slow start, I think they'll put up 50 points. After maybe allowing some points to Purdue, they'll pretty much shut them down for the rest of the night and get out with a win. It's as simple as that. Can Purdue pull this off? I'm actually going to say no. And by no, I don't mean never say never, because that's foolish. What I mean is it would genuinely shock me if Purdue even played this within 3 touchdowns. That would shock me. And if they won, then I would not know what to say about the Big Ten anymore. I wouldn't. Outside of maybe Penn State, because they haven't touched Oregon or Ohio State or most of the teams that the Buckeyes or Ducks have touched yet. But a loss to Oregon for Purdue is just, well, especially if it's of the magnitude I think it'll be, time to reconsider the Ryan Walters era. For Oregon to lose to Purdue, I think would speak to my point that college football is a weak year, but it would also speak to the fact that the Oregon-Ohio State game wasn't as high implications as, well, it was told to be. But I think it was that high implications. I don't think Oregon is really in danger of losing to Purdue here. They'll win big. They're one of the best teams in the country, and they'll continue to march on. Thank you so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Little OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Slay and Ismar Tyler 9 Chilton Kush for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus for being All-Conference members. Please check out my Patreon page, merchandise store, and Discord server via the links in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Have a great day, everyone. Go Boilermakers, and go Ducks.